Welcome back to the GitHub Copilot UBB video series, brought to you by Canarys. In the previous module, we explored agent mode and learned when it should be used, how it impacts AI credit consumption, and the best practices for using it efficiently. In this module, we'll understand what counts as context, what unnecessarily expands it, and how to provide just the right amount of context to achieve the best balance between response quality and AI credit efficiency. The amount of context you provide directly affects how many tokens Copilot processes, which in turn influences AI credit consumption. So let's begin by understanding what context actually means and why it has such a direct impact on AI credit consumption. Let's first understand what we actually mean by context. When you interact with GitHub Copilot, it processes more than just your prompt. It can also use selected code, referenced files, conversation history, and relevant workspace context to understand your request. Together, these form the total context sent to the model. The larger the context, the more tokens are processed, which can increase AI credit consumption. That's why it's important to provide only the context needed for the task. The more context Copilot needs to process, the more tokens are required. Since AI credits are based on model usage, larger context generally means higher AI credit consumption. This doesn't mean you should avoid providing context. It means you should provide only the context that's actually needed for the task. So if more context can increase AI credit consumption, the next question becomes, what actually causes our context to grow unnecessarily? Let's look at some common examples. Here are some common examples of how context can impact AI credit usage. For example, using a workspace when it isn't needed, selecting an entire file instead of just the required function, or referencing multiple unrelated files all increase the amount of context Copilot has to process. On the other hand, referencing only the relevant files, selecting only the required code block, keeping prompts focused, and starting a new chat for unrelated work help reduce unnecessary AI credit consumption while still producing the same quality results, but this doesn't mean we should always use the smallest possible context. The key is to provide the right amount of context based on the task. Let's see what that looks like. One important principle is to match the amount of context to the task rather than providing everything by default. As you can see, different types of tasks naturally require different levels of context. The key takeaway is that AI credit efficiency isn't about using the least context. It's about using only what's necessary. When the context is well scoped, Copilot can still generate high-quality responses while avoiding unnecessary token processing and AI credit consumption. So, how do we consistently keep our context focused in day-to-day development? Let's look at a few practical techniques you can start using immediately. Let's look at some practical ways to optimize context without sacrificing response quality. First, keep the scope focused by selecting only the code that's relevant. Reference only the files the task needs. Keep conversations focused by starting a new chat for unrelated work, and expand the context only when the initial response isn't sufficient. In most cases, starting with focused context and adding more only when required gives the best balance between response quality and AI credit efficiency. These simple habits are easy to apply every day. Let's finish with the key takeaways you should remember about effective context management. The objective isn't to provide less context, but to provide the right context for the task. Well-managed context improves response quality, reduces unnecessary token usage, and helps you get the most value from usage-based billing. Following these simple practices will make your Copilot interactions both more effective and more AI credit efficient. Always be intentional with the context you provide. Focused context helps Copilot generate better responses efficiently, while unnecessary context only increases AI credit usage. Now that we've covered how context influences AI credit consumption, let's move on to model choice and see how selecting different AI models impacts both capability and AI credit usage. See you in next video. Thank you for watching.